Hello, welcome to Raymond Castile's Basement of Horror. It's Halloween. Trick or treat. I hope you liked the new intro. Now, where have I seen something like that before? Oh yeah, there was this show in the 1970s called Rod Serling's Night Gallery. And of course I watched that as a kid, and that opening just terrified me. The theme, the way those images would just come at you, and they alternated between a still image and then a moving image, and they had all those faces. It really scared me. And the show Night Gallery, it's a pretty dark show. I mean, it has its goofy moments, but it can get pretty dark. It's overall a pretty serious horror program. And if you've never watched it, I would encourage you to watch it. But don't watch the syndicated version. Like if you go on Amazon, they've been re-edited for syndication, not only taking stuff out, but also adding stuff in. Don't watch that. If you can, get the home video version. I know it's available on DVD. I don't know if it's on Blu-ray or not. But get that box set and watch it that way, because that's the original broadcast version. And I made the mistake recently of watching some of the syndicated episodes, and I realized these have been altered. It just changes the whole tone and everything, so don't watch it that way. Get it on home video, get it on DVD or Blu-ray. But anyway, I loved that show as a kid, and I don't know why, but I just wanted to pay tribute to that show. And so the opening, obviously, this new opening is reminiscent of Night Gallery. And yes, I composed that theme and recorded it. That's my theme. I didn't want to completely rip off Night Gallery's theme. So I hope it's very much it's taken in tribute instead of seen as a rip-off. I am paying tribute to Night Gallery. And I know it's a very long opening. We will shorten it. In fact, beginning next week, most of the time I will show a shorter version of it. But every now and then I'll throw in the full-length version. So I hope you like that. Are you ready for Halloween? As I'm recording this, we're just heading into October, and I really hope I have a good Halloween season. I'm always a little, kind of like, you know how people get depressed during the Christmas season? Because I think they feel like they have these expectations of what Christmas should be, and it doesn't live up to that. I get like that in the fall during the Halloween season, and I'm looking at Billy down there. I wish he would jump up here, but he's right there. Hello, Billy. I get that feeling during Halloween season where I have these expectations of what it should be, what a perfect fall would be, what a perfect October would be, and it doesn't live up to that, and I get kind of glum. So I hope I hope the next 5 weeks fulfills my expectations of what a nice Halloween season ought to be. But one way that I help myself feel like it is Halloween is by doing this show. And this kind of puts me in a Halloween frame of mind, especially since I haven't been doing it over the summer. So now it's time to do Basement of Horror. It's time for Halloween. It helps me feel like it's Halloween. And that's a way I'd like to feel all year round. I think a lot of people who watch this would agree. I was going to start the season off looking at those NECA Ben Cooper figures. And then I decided, let's put those off. We'll look at those, we'll cover those, but let's put it off a couple of weeks, and we'll do it later in October. I do have ideas about how I'd like to cover them instead of just saying here they are. I've got plans of how to approach them, but let's just wait another couple of weeks, and we'll get to those, don't worry. But, I mean, everyone's looking at those figures. That's what all the collectors are talking about. If you collect monster stuff, you or everyone you know online, and they're all talking about those NECA figures. And I've got things to say about those NECA figures. I mean, I like the figures themselves, but I've got things to say about other things surrounding those figures and how they've been distributed and how they've been made available or unavailable to the community, the collecting community. And I'll get to that when we finally cover them. There'll be some of that in there. But for now, let's be celebratory and let's talk about Halloween. In particular, let's talk about what those figures are based on, the Ben Cooper costumes. You might notice I got some Frankensteins over here. Hello, Frankensteins. My shadow is covering them up. Oh, that's no good. And behind me, I've got quite a few Ben Cooper costumes. All of these are Frankenstein costumes. And that's why we got Frankenstein here. And behind me, I got a Frankenstein poster. So we're going to talk about Frankenstein in particular. Frankenstein costumes. And I was going to include like Halco and Collegeville and Topstone. And then I took a look at this stack and I said, man, you got to be crazy. That's ridiculous. How am I going to get through all that? So I'm going to be doing well enough just to cover Ben Cooper. If you want to know more about Collegeville and Halco, look at some of my previous episodes from Halloween's past. I've done episodes where I look at certainly Frankenstein from Collegeville, Halco, other companies, look at my Topstone videos. There's plenty of material there. This episode, we're going to focus on Ben Cooper Frankenstein. Ben Cooper's a huge topic. How do you narrow it down? Well, we'll focus on one character, Frankenstein. Now, just to get this out of the way, since we have these here, let's take a look at these. What are these? They're not Ben Cooper. That is a vintage Don Post Frankenstein mask. It's foamed. That is a classic early Don Post Frankenstein. This was advertised in Warren magazines like Captain Company ads. You can find reproductions of this on the collector market. This is a real one. This is vintage. And this dusty mask, that's also Don Post. To me, it's rotting like crazy. That's another early Don Post Frankenstein mask. And it was kind of rotting when I got it, but it's gotten much worse. I mean, look at that. It's kind of like Frankenstein, the True Story. He's rotting. And this big guy. So those two I just showed you, those are vintage. This is a modern Topstone made from original vintage Topstone masters, but it's made in the present day. This is not something that was sold at a store in the 1960s or 70s. This is something that was made in modern times, but it's from the original Topstone master. And I just wanted some Frankenstein decor. As we talk about Frankenstein. Now, Ben Cooper. We've talked all about Ben Cooper before. And if you want to know more about the history, it's a Brooklyn-based company. If you want to know who the founders were and when was it founded and all that, see one of my previous Ben Cooper episodes. We've been all through that. We're just going to look at Frankenstein mask today. That's it. It's just going to be a simple episode. Start things off. We're just going to look at Frankenstein. I mean, it's a nice way to spend an October evening, right? Or if you're watching this on a Saturday morning, it's a nice way to spend the first Saturday morning of October just looking at Frankenstein masks. I don't know. I think that's a good way to spend your time. Let's start with this guy. And we'll be looking at mostly box Frankensteins, but let's take a look at this. Here's a Frankenstein mask. And that tie is original. Beauty isn't everything. Isn't that unusual? It's staple, but those are industrial staples. That's not like a homemade thing. That is a classic Ben Cooper Frankenstein. He doesn't have his little scar painted in. That's interesting. And this fellow is from 1974. Copyright 1974, Ben Cooper, Inc. And I don't know if that was sold in a box or like, I mean, I'm assuming because it's unusual with this tie that it was sold on a rack, just like this, but I don't know. Could have been in a box. Could have been in the box with the tie folded over. I'm not sure. I mean, it doesn't look like, well, you know, actually I was going to say it doesn't look like the rack style mask, but it does actually because it has this collar. And the box ones never had that. So this was sold on a peg hook without a costume. So that's kind of an unusual Frankenstein mask. That's a 1970s Ben Cooper, but that design goes back further than that. And here's an example. You can see it's, look at the detail of the hair and the clamps. You can tell that it's based on Glenn Strange. Very much a Glenn Strange likeness. And this one does have the scar colored in. What else do we have here? Just to get some other companies represented, here's a Collegeville Frankenstein. That is a classic, iconic Collegeville Frankenstein. Doesn't get any more Collegeville than that. That's about as Collegeville as you can get. Collegeville Frankenstein. They used this design for years and years. Very different from Ben Cooper. It's an original design, and it's not a particular actor. It's not Universal Studios Frankenstein. It's a generic Frankenstein. But it's iconic in its own right. Here's a Halco. So you see, I am dealing with these other companies. Here's a Halco Frankenstein. This is kind of like a werewolf Frankenstein. And on a previous episode, I showed you a Universal Loncini Jr. Frankenstein based on Ghost of Frankenstein. And that's a unique mask. But this is a more typical Halco Frankenstein mask. They made this design, lasted for years and years and years, and they produced it in different colors. Those very specific Universal designs are early 60s, and I don't think they made those very long. I don't know who made this one. That's a cute little Frankie. I don't know who made this Frankenstein. I don't think it was Ben Cooper. I have no idea. It's just a cute little generic Frankenstein. I could ramble off some possible company names, but it wouldn't mean anything, so who knows. But I just feel like that is a beautiful vintage Frankenstein. When you think of what a vintage Frankenstein looks like, I mean, they just don't look like that anymore. You don't see Frankenstein designs like that anymore. And I like that he's blue. He's not green, he's blue. One last one here. This is a gauze Frankenstein. You know, he's kind of like the, actually he's kind of like the Dom Post. You see? Billy's whining over there. He's kind of like the Don Post mask, but he's colored more like the Ben Cooper masks. And at one point I did find him in a catalog, but I've forgotten who made him. But he's fabric. He's not plastic. So there we go. Started things off with an odd selection of loose masks. So later, when we don't take things out of the boxes, and you think, well, why don't you ever take anything out of the box? We want to see this. Well, there we go. I just satiated that by showing you all these things out of the box. So now we don't have to take anything else out of the box, right? Well, we will. We'll take a couple of things out. When I think of Ben Cooper, if there's a mascot for Ben Cooper, something that represents Ben Cooper Halloween, I think it's Frankenstein. I think it's the Ben Cooper Frankenstein. If you were going to choose one character, one costume, one mask to be the emblem of Ben Cooper Halloween costumes, I think it would be Frankenstein. With that yellow face and the Glenn Strange likeness and this sort of belligerent look. Like he looks like he's trying to be tough. Like, you better look out, he's going to beat you up. There's something almost like a bully about that face. But let's start off with, before we get to that, we'll work our way back to that. My favorite Ben Cooper box design, certainly, I think most people's favorite, would be the blue monster box. And this is the box design that NECA chose to go with for the first two waves. And I can understand why. I mean, it's most people's favorite box. People have a strong nostalgic connection to this. This box is dated 1973, and that's the era when the Aurora monster models were being reissued in the square boxes with the glow artwork, and that's where these faces come from. Those are based on Aurora glow-in-the-dark box art for the glow-in-the-dark kits. And the following year, Azrak Henway International would make their Super Monsters line. They would introduce that series of monster toys, and they would use, at least on the back of the cards, artwork that's also inspired by the Aurora glow kits. And their mummy action figure would be yellow like that. It would have a yellow face and ultimately yellow hands. And it's interesting how things keep echoing through the years. Because this Aurora art is based on 1960s James Bama art. But it's hard to connect that 70s glow art with the Bama art from the 60s. They're so different, even though one's based on the other. They just painted over the Bama paintings. But it just looks like it's from a different world. Now here's a box that's a little rougher. So it's not sealed up. And this is what I grew up with. My Ben Cooper was what you're looking at right here. When I went to Ben Franklin or Kmart and for Halloween, and I looked at the costumes for Ben Cooper, I saw these blue boxes, so I associate that with Ben Cooper. And it's really interesting that they chose that early Jack Pierce test makeup. And the reason they did that was because Bama used that on the Aurora boxes. his original painting for the Aurora Frankenstein, it uses that early test makeup that was never actually in the movie. And because Bama used it, the actual model kit does not use that. The model kit uses, it's sculpted on Karloff's likeness from Bride of Frankenstein, where he has the facial scarring. So the actual kit used Bride of Frankenstein imagery with the torn clothes and all that. But the Bama painting on the box used 1931 Frankenstein imagery, particularly the test makeup that was never in the movie. And so here we have, because of the Aurora connection, it finds its way onto this Ben Cooper costume. And I'm not going to be taking many of these out of the box. This is one of the few, and the only reason is because the box is kind of, it's not in very good shape. And you can see what the costume looks like. I'm not going to, this is all black. It's very different from the later costumes. But I'm not going to unfold these because, as you might have heard me say in the past episodes dealing with these costumes, once you unfold them, you can never get them back again. And I've had the experience of unfolding Halloween costumes and then folding them back only for the folds to crack. Just unfolding it and folding it again, the folds will just split. And I learned my lesson, so I'm not going to do that again. So I don't unfold the costumes. But anyway, I mean, that gives you an idea of what they look like. This costume has a more gothic look. It's got that black jacket. Hey, not a green jacket, black jacket. It's got that black jacket. It does have Frankenstein in the middle, but some of these later ones have these weird designs where Frankenstein's busting through a brick wall like some kind of superhero, and he's got like a checkered outfit. It's a very different take on Frankie. This is a more Universal design, and I mean Universal Studios, a more cinematic design. And you can see this version actually says Universal Monsters. Well, singular monster. And that might be the first Universal branded monster item. This version does not say that. There's no Universal there. This box does not have the word Universal above the word monster. And I don't know what year they made that running change. Let's see if there's a difference in the year. Nope. Let's see it. That's interesting. I don't even see a year on that box. Whereas this is the Universal one says 1973. The one without Universal doesn't have a date. At least not on the box. Maybe the costume does. It's got a little Kmart. Yeah, I don't know if that's Kmart or Kresge, but it's got the little Kmart logo on the corner. And I remember these at Kmart. I remember them at Ben Franklin and drugstores. Now I'm wondering, how am I going to put these away when I'm done with them? I guess I'll stick it in there. So it's interesting that NECA chose to go with this box design, but not the costume in the box. They used an older version for the actual costume that the child is wearing. Here is a very generic looking Ben Cooper Frankenstein. It's made in the USA. Has as far as I know, all Ben Cooper costumes were made in the USA. At least certainly during the 60s, 70s period. Yeah, no date or anything. But there it is. And I vaguely remember this box design. Or similar box designs. And unfortunately, you can't see a whole lot of that mask in there. But, you know, it's kind of a goofy, cartoony Frankie, so you're not missing anything. It's more important just to see the different box design. It's a cool box. Really classic Halloween-y colors and shapes. Classic Ben Cooper art. I mean, just the art, those faces just bring me back to childhood. That's what Halloween looked like when I was a kid. Stuff like that. That was the visual identity of Halloween. Okay, what do we got now? This is an unusual one. Take a look at this. At first it looks like the one we just saw, that yellow one that we saw earlier, but it's not. And some nice black cats. Of course I like black cats. That one is looking at the costume, and this one's looking at you. That's a beautiful box. Now let's look inside the box and see what this thing looks like. Because it does... Oh, by the way, before we do anything else, it says monster. And a lot of these things say monster. They don't say Frankenstein. Now, yeah, I was double checking. The blue box says Frankenstein. These other boxes say monster. And I think we'll find as we go along, more of these boxes will say monster. Okay, here is the mask inside this box. This is what it looks like. Now, do you see that weird bolt at the top there? That is a different sculpt. That's not like the other ones we were looking at. That is different. The top of the head is different. It doesn't have those clamps. It's got that weird bolt. Is it a bolt or is it like a light? Like a robot, like kind of like Mecha Kong. I think it's a bolt, but it could be a light shining out of his head. I don't know. It's not the same sculpt. It's a completely different sculpt. The Glenn Strange influence is much less apparent. He's a less aggressive looking Frankenstein. Maybe a friendlier looking Frankenstein. Here's the costume inside the box. Oh, this is so minty and unused. I just hate to mess with it. But you can see he's got that brick wall I was telling you about. Does he have the checkered outfit? Ooh, it's crinkly. Yeah, see, I would never... Yeah. There's that checkered outfit. And that's what the NECA figure has. It has a checkered outfit like that. Put it back in there. I don't think this costume's ever been used. This is an unused, minty, fresh costume, so I think you can understand my reluctance to try to undo it. Beautiful box, beautiful costume. Look at him. No splits anywhere. The box isn't split. The cellophane isn't split. I mean, it's just like you found it on a store shelf. Very, very nice. And I love the weird design. It's indicative of the era. Now, what era is that? Is the 60s or is the 70s? I don't know. But this is, as far as condition, that's one of the better ones I've got. Color bright costume. The fact that it's emphasizing color bright, the safety aspect, makes me think that perhaps it's a 70s costume. Because I don't think the 60s ones were as self-conscious about safety. I think that was more of a 70s thing. And then, of course, in the 80s, that really, I mean, that was a crisis as far as people thinking Halloween wasn't safe. It almost killed the holiday. That's when all the Halloween manufacturers got together and did a brilliant marketing campaign to convince people that Halloween was, in fact, safe. What shall we look at next? Well, because we're still on that kind of design, let's look at this. Here's another example of that classic Glenn Strange look, that Glenn Strange likeness. It really looks like Glenn Strange, doesn't it? And I love the Spook Town box. I think this is my second favorite box style after the Blue Monster box. And unfortunately, I don't have as many of these as I wish, the Spook Town style boxes. They're kind of hard to get. It's hard to find costumes in this style box. And I know, well, maybe I shouldn't be so certain, but I think that this is a 60s costume because I know the Barnabas Collins costume, which I do not own, originally came in a Spook Town box like this, and that is a 60s costume. Look at that artwork. The owl. Look at that owl. Now this is interesting. It says Frankenstein. How about that? Any dates, any dates, any dates? And you notice it doesn't say anything about colors, safety, reflective, blah, blah, blah. Nothing like that. Although I say that, and then, what about that? There's a big blurb right there about safety. So I spoke too soon. But it really emphasizes that these costumes are flame retardant more so than that they are reflective. I mean, that's in there. It's the last item. Color bright for day or night. But they're emphasizing ventilation and the two bullet points about them being flame proof. And the color element is the last bullet point. And I think the later costumes with that color element becomes the top concern. But there's no doubt to me that this is a 60s costume. Now, an expert could chime in and say, no, 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 no. But I think it's a 60s costume because Spook Town is a 60s box. And there he is. As a classic Ben Cooper Frankenstein. The Glenn Strange version. And you see his scars has color in it. For some reason his clamps are not as defined. At least they don't seem like they are on this one. And what kind of costume does he have? He has a similar costume to the other one, but I don't think it's exactly the same. I don't think it is. Oh, here's a date. 1963. 1963. At least when it originated. I mean, doesn't mean this was sold in 63. But he does not have that checkered design. It's the same idea. He's busting through a brick wall, but it's not the same artwork as the later one, which I think he was in here like this. Now this costume has been used, so maybe I'm being a little overprotective of it. It's got a split corner, it's missing the cellophane. There he is. It would be nice to find a dead mint example of this. But as we've now seen, that checkered outfit came later. But that same idea of Frankenstein busting through the wall, that was there from the 60s, early 60s. In 63, that is the heart of the first monster craze. That is when you had the Aurora model kits in full force. You had all those other great 60s toys. Where should I put you? Put you in here. And you'll be safe right there. You had Addams Family and Munsters and Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and just fantastic stuff. You had the AIP Vincent Price movies. You had Hammer movies. It was a great time for monster kids. It was a great time to be a monster kid. It was before my time. I'm a 70s monster kid. But that costume is like smack dab in the middle of all that. What should we look at now? Well, I was gonna go to another Spook Town box, but first let's do this. Put you right there for now. This is not the original box for this. I'm just using it to protect the mask. I'll show you an original box in a minute. So that is the Astro Spook. You can see it's that same Glenn Strange style yellow Frankenstein. And I put it in this box because it's an astronaut box, so I thought it was appropriate. And at one time, these Astro Spooks were really hard to get. And now there was a find on them, and so now they're not so difficult to get anymore. At least not loose. In the box, yes. And they made two other Astro creatures. They made a kind of a witch-like character, and I don't remember her name. It was a weird name, as I recall. Maybe a politically incorrect name. I don't remember. And then there was another kind of a goofy, nerdy character, but he was kind of like a monster, but kind of like a nerdy Mortimer Snurd sort of a character. And both of those are part of this Astro series of these weird creatures in astronaut helmets. So there he is. I say that a lot. There he is. The NASA Astro Spook. And you can't see, if he had that scar, you can't see because of the helmet. But here we go. Frankenstein is going off into space now. So this must have been in the heart of the space program. And I'll see if the box one has a date on it. But that is just such an inventive, weird, cool concept. I just love the idea that Frankenstein is an astronaut. He's an Astro Spook. It reminds me of... Oh, by the way, this was never circulated. So I think all the ones that are part of that find, I think they were all unused stock. They were never circulated. So this never had the rubber band stapled to them. So there wouldn't be a box to that. It was never in a box. I don't know what the story is and how that find came about, but I think there was an archive. I thought it was a Collegeville archive, so why they would have had this, I don't know. But I remember that someone had some original hand-drawn concept art from Collegeville for a mummy, and I bought that in addition to a similar unused example of that mummy mask. And then the same guy had this. And I don't know what their archive was all about. I don't know what happened, why they had Collegeville and Ben Cooper designs. But apparently they had several of these Astro Spooks, and so now they're not that hard to find anymore. But they used to be impossible to find. Now let's look at a boxed one. There's a boxed one. And this is the Hoot and Toot version. So he had a little whistle thing in his mouth. It's fallen away. I don't have it. I think I will take this. It looks like it should be simple enough to take this out of the bag. Some of these things are just sealed for all time. I did, preparing for the NECA episode, before I decided to postpone that, I was looking at some of these. I was looking at some devils and witches and things and skeletons to try to see if I could positively match the costume to the NECA version, the little figures. And so I had to undo all this wrapping that I entombed these things in. And I spent 20 minutes just on 2 costumes, just trying to get it out and look at it and put it back and seal it up again. So that's why I won't be going through all of these that are sealed up and undoing them. But this one's easy to get to. So here he is. He doesn't, I said it again, here he is. He doesn't have cellophane, unfortunately. There we go. On the box, he's called Space Spook, not Astro Spook. Not the spookiest box, unfortunately. But I mean, it's kind of cool that way, that he's sort of funky like that. Is there a date on him? And I am practically blind. I mean, don't tell the driver's license bureau that, but it's just our little secret. But I mean, I cannot see. I can barely see the fingers in front of my face. As I said before, I'm partially deaf, and I have tinnitus, and I've lost my sense of smell due to a surgery, and I can't see. I've got cataracts from birth, so I can't see, I can't hear, and I can't smell. But I still have 2 out of 5 senses working. That's interesting. Now, I've shown this on the program before. There is the costume. Well, I mean, this is the mask for the costume. And it's different. It's not exactly, and I showed them side by side once before. They're not exactly the same. The actual production one is a little bit different. And the costume shows him in space. Let's take one more look at this. I just think that's a brilliant costume, a brilliant idea for a costume. It wasn't done out of brilliance, it was done just trying to make money somehow. Like, okay, kids, we've moved out of the monster craze now. Now kids are into space. What do? Monsters have been our perennial favorite for years, and now kids want space stuff. And this would have been the era, I think, like when this Color Forms Our Spaceman came out. I imagine it would have been around the same time. And then after the moon landing, yeah, that made things, that heated things up as far as popularity of space for a minute in 2001: A Space Odyssey. But then once we realized that there weren't any aliens on the moon, it wasn't made of cheese, the reality was kind of mundane compared to the fantasy, and then space and pop culture started to decline a bit until Star Wars, and then it went back up again. And you had Star Wars, and you had the Mars rover and space shuttle. And so when I was a kid, but that Astro Spook is not from that era. That's from the previous space era. Just like the monster craze, there was the 60s one, early to mid-60s, and then there was the 70s one, mid-70s. Well, there was a space craze then, like late 60s, as far as merchandising and toys, and then another one in late 70s, early 80s. You had Monsters Space. And now we're going to start looking at a different design. And all of these are more or less the same. And at first I thought the NECA figure was based on this one, until I start looking at it, really until I started preparing for this season, and I realized it wasn't. But here is, I'm not going to say here he is, there's the other 60s Frankenstein. And he might have been available early 70s, like 71 maybe. This box design, I've seen different dates on it, but I think this originated late 60s, I think, like 69 maybe, and I think it crossed over into the 70s, like 71 or maybe 72, something like that. I think this was the transitional box between like the Spook Town, which would have been earlier, and the Blue Monster box. But it definitely came between those two. I'm just not sure what the bracket years would be. And he is licensed. He's called Frankenstein, and he is licensed through Universal. It says so in the fine print. And of course, I really like these pumpkin boxes. This is one of my other, I guess this is my third favorite. So Blue Monster is my favorite Ben Cooper box design. Then the Spook Town, or at least the version of Spook Town we just saw. And then this Jack-o'-lantern design. Here is another Spook Town, but this is a very different Spook Town. You need dates on this. Made in USA, but I think all Ben Cooper costumes, certainly the early ones, but did Ben Cooper ever make their costumes overseas? Maybe someone can let me know. I don't think they ever did. I think their entire run all the way into the 90s, I think, was always... You see, that's what I'm not sure of. Maybe the early 90s, perhaps. But I think they were always made in USA. I think the entire history of the company, I think they were always made in USA. But a Ben Cooper scholar can correct me. This is definitely made in USA. I was going to say that this was the same style mask we just saw, but it really isn't. It's slightly different. I mean, it's similar aesthetic, but it's not the same. Definitely not the same. But this is a Spook Town box, but it's a later, I think it's later version Spook Town box. So let's put that there. Here we have another take on that style of mask, yet again slightly different. We'll be able to open this one up. And you can see this is a very old-fashioned kind of a box. This doesn't have any of that sort of Halloween-y style, that pop culture style. This is much more of almost like a costume shop aesthetic. And this is for a young adult. And it is called Frankenstein. And it is Universal licensed. Magic Glow brand. Super deluxe quality. That's cute. I like the little sad looking jack-o'-lantern. That one's a little happier. I don't know if he's happy, but he's kind of mischievous. This one's just sad. Okay, let's open this up. This is a minty box. It's not splitting or anything. Now we can see this mask in all its glory. And the artwork is a little different. It's a little different. That one's very similar to that one. But it's not really that similar to this one. I mean, you can tell they're from the same era, roughly. But look at the almost hand-drawn sketch. Look at these lines, like there. How it's almost like it's someone drew it by hand. I mean, obviously all these are drawn by hand originally, but I mean, it just has that hand-drawn kind of free-form look, this sort of illustrated look. And you can see that it kind of has that look there. And it has a pebbly texture, pebbly skin texture. Which most of the other ones don't have, not like this. And that costume is weird. Look at that weird Frankenstein. And there's a knife. This Frankenstein means business. Look at that knife. He's not kidding around. I guess if it's a young adult Frankenstein, have to have a knife. Young adult, I guess that's a teenager. I suppose they're like all those teenagers in those 60s movies. They're always got their little switchblades and they're trying to be cool, having a dance-off with West Side Story music playing. Unless it's West Coast, then they're like Frankie Avalon. A little different vibe. Here he is. I said it again. Well, here he is. I might as well keep saying it. That's a really nice box. You know, I think some of these adult-sized boxes tend to be in better shape because I don't think anyone ever used them. I think the adult-sized boxes were the ones that were left over on November 1st. Nobody bought them. And this isn't really adult, this is young adult. But I have a few adult-sized costumes. And they do tend to be in really nice shape. I think nobody bought the adult costume, so they went back to the warehouse or whatever. Now, is that the last of it? Oh, no, there's one more. There's one more. And this is the most unusual of all. What is that doing in this video? This is ridiculous. That's not Frankenstein. That's like a witch or something. What the heck? And a black cat. Oh, it's Billy. He's asleep over there. It's Billy. Who is that? Well, it says who it is. It's the Bride of Frankenstein. And you're thinking, wait a minute, is this in the wrong box? Nope. This is an unlicensed, non-universal Bride of Frankenstein. No licensing. I thought I had some of these jack-o'-lantern boxes with a date on it, but I don't see it. I know I have some of these with a date on it, but not these. Well, let's take a look at this Bride of Frankenstein. What do we have here? That's the Bride of Frankenstein. I guess it's a Bride of Frankenstein, not the Bride of Frankenstein. Maybe it's the Bride of Dr. Frankenstein. It's Ben Cooper's original take on what a Bride of Frankenstein would look like. It's not the universal Bride of Frankenstein. It's just a monster lady. If little girls want to be Frankenstein, but their parents won't buy them the regular Frankenstein, then they can have the Bride of Frankenstein, but it's essentially a witch. Oh, it's one of those sparkly ones. Ooh, this is a mess. This is going to be a mess. See, it's sparkly. There's a little skull in there. Where's the skull? There he is. I said it again. There's a skull. Yeah. Oh. No, that's a disaster waiting to happen if I try to take that apart. I've seen photos of this. It's just in the sparkly colors. It's like a witch sort of a character, like this mask just looks like that. And she just has I think she has like a skirt, some kind of witchy sort of a dress. But she looks more like a witch. But she is marketed as Bride of Frankenstein with a black cat on her head. I don't know. She sure seems like a witch to me. I think that's a witch. But Ben Cooper says it's Bride of Frankenstein. Not the Bride of Frankenstein. Just Bride of Frankenstein. So that is a Frankenstein costume. Like, like Frankenstein's Bloody Terror. It's the weirdest Frankenstein of them all. One more look. I like that cat. That's an unusual costume. I don't know when this costume was introduced, but I just have a feeling. I have a feeling this wasn't the first release. I feel like this seems like an earlier idea, like something that would have come out earlier in the 60s. I could be wrong. It just seems like by the time 1970 rolled around, I just don't know if they would have been doing that. Especially that sparkly costume. I don't think those were in fashion by then. But who knows? There's no date on it. At least I couldn't find one. Now, why didn't they just license the Elsa Lanchester Bride of Frankenstein? I mean, Ben Cooper was all about licensing, and they had all these other licenses. Elsa Lanchester, I believe, I'm sure she was still alive when this would have been made. So maybe that was part of it. Although Aurora made a model kit of the Bride of Frankenstein and had her likeness. I don't know. Maybe Elsa had a problem with stuff like that, but I don't know. I don't think so. I think she was pretty proud of being the Bride of Frankenstein, and she would do the scream on talk shows. So why didn't Ben Cooper just license the character? Since we've already seen a lot more than I thought. A lot of these Frankensteins are licensed Universal Frankensteins. I didn't think they would be. I thought the 70s one, yeah, and maybe one other one, but I was surprised. I thought they'd all just say monster, monster, monster. And it's interesting that like this design says monster. And this very similar design says Frankenstein. And I said similar instead of similar, like I usually do. Someone commented on one of my videos once. Their only comment was, "It's similar, not simular." Thank you very much. Well, anyway. So two similar Frankensteins. Only one is called Monster, and the other is called Frankenstein. One's licensed, and the other isn't. And this bride is not licensed. But why not? Because Ben Cooper was all about licensing. That's one of the things they innovated, licensing. Well, I guess that brings us to the end. I think we're through. I don't know why. Let's just look at this one more time. This is certainly one of my favorites. Because that just screams Halloween, like my childhood Halloween. That weird bolt in his head. You don't see things like that now. Someone asked online, they posted a poll. Do you prefer generic monsters or licensed? As far as classic monsters, do you prefer generic versions or realistic, screen-accurate likenesses? And I said it depends on the era. If we're talking about modern, I prefer screen-accurate licensed. If we're talking about NECA, something like that, I want dead-on, accurate Karloff, Lugosi, whatever, just like in the movie. If we're talking about vintage, well, I like licensed, accurate vintage stuff too, but I have a soft spot for unlicensed, fanciful takes on the monsters. Like the Lincoln Monsters is the first thing that pops into my head. I love the Lincoln Monsters. But you never see anything like that now. When someone makes an unlicensed, generic kind of a monster item, it never has that kind of charm, that kind of style, that kind of personality. So, I mean, the modern idea of a generic monster, it it's very boring. But 60s, 70s generic monsters, those have a lot of character. Like some of these, of course, they're not screen accurate. They're licensed, but they have their own vision about how Frankenstein's monster should look. And I miss that. Everything, like from the late 80s forward, the style guide just descended on merchandising, and now everything is enslaved by the style guide, unless you're making something retro like NECA and the Little Ben Cooper toys, which are based on something specific from the past. Then you can get away with it, but now you're exactly copying this thing from the past. But these days, I mean, you would never see a Universal Frankenstein that was licensed that didn't either look like the awful style guide art for that year, or wasn't trying to be exactly screen accurate to a particular film, the first Frankenstein, or the Bride of Frankenstein, or Son of Frankenstein. You can't just make a Frankenstein and give him a flat head and a scar, bolts and green skin and a black jacket and just do your own version of Frankenstein. It's got to either look like the style guide, or it's got to look like the actor likeness and be screen accurate. You can't, a company can't just make their take on Frankenstein's monster and make it look like a Universal monster, or the Wolfman, a creature. And that's a shame. I really hate the way style guides have just taken all the imagination out of toys and merchandising. And I think it's part of why we have such a positive reaction to some of this older stuff, and especially this kind of vintage imagery. Because today, you just wouldn't see something that had that kind of personality. You wouldn't see something that had heart in it, but didn't look just like either the movie or the style guide. And talking about heart, the style guide never has any heart. That's some of the most, especially with Universal, that's some of the most awful artwork you've ever seen, going back through the last 30 plus years. How could they be any more generic and lifeless and soulless? It's like their mission is to just squeeze every drop of emotion out of that imagery. It's so corporate and so generic. All the life is just stamped out of it. And if you're not going to pay for an actor likeness, you've got to make it look exactly like that style guide art. And it's awful. And it wasn't like that in the 60s and the 70s and even into the 80s. And then that's when it started, that style guide thing started coming into full force. And ever since then, everything has to look like that year's style guide. Or it has to be actor likeness and look just like the particular actor and look just like a particular film. It can't be Frankenstein's monster from the 1930s. It has to be 31 Frankenstein, or Bride of Frankenstein, or Son of Frankenstein. It can't just be a conglomeration, like the idea of a 30s Frankenstein. It has to be specific. And I feel like that took a lot of excitement out of monster merchandising, took a lot of heart out of it, took a lot of originality out of it, took a lot of surprise out of it. So if a company announces they're going to make a Frankenstein figure and it's licensed, well, you know what it's going to look like. It's just a matter, is it Karloff or is it generic? But either way, you know what it's going to look like. There's no surprise there. Unless it's specifically modeled off of an older toy or older item and it's trying to be retro, and then they can get away with it. Well, it's too bad. It's just too bad that Universal and other companies don't encourage more imagination with how those characters are depicted. I'm sure the very notion of that would give them an allergic reaction. They would say, huh, what? What are you talking about? Well, I'm glad I grew up in an era where monsters were fun and horror was fun. And I keep coming back to that. If you've been watching for a while, I just wish horror could be fun again. And I know there are some filmmakers and there's some things out there in the popular culture that are going there, and hopefully we're moving out of this dreadful age where horror was just as fun as a Suicide Note, where all horror was just tragic and miserable and all about trauma and anguish, and forget about monsters. There's hardly any monsters, not in horror so much. Science fiction or action, okay, but like horror. I want to see monster movies. I want to see fun movies. They can be dark, they can be violent, but I want them to be entertaining. I want them to be fun. I want to be able to eat popcorn and have a good time and leave. If I see them at a theater, which is rare these days, I want to leave the theater feeling uplifted, even if it was a downbeat story. I want horror to be fun. And when I see this imagery, I remember when horror was fun and monsters were fun and monsters ruled and everything wasn't so serious and so dreadful and so miserable and like just a weight bearing down on everyone and everything. You just look at one of these silly Frankensteins and the weight dissipates. And maybe that's why people have such a visceral reaction to those NECA figures. They're just, even if you didn't grow up in that time, you recognize it. You recognize what they represent. There was a time when monsters were fun and monsters were the biggest thing. And just monsters equaled fun. Horror equaled fun. It could be scary. It could be nightmarish. It could be dark. It could be downbeat. But it was still fun. It was still something you could dream about and exercise your imagination. And there was something uplifting about it. Can we get back to that somehow in the popular culture? Can we get back to that? I hope so. Next week, I have a special episode. I'm going to try something new. It'll be a panel discussion with multiple guests, and we'll be talking about being monster kids, growing up with monsters, becoming collectors, what Halloween was like when we were kids, what is it like now. We'll talk about the NECA figures. We'll go over a lot of different topics. That's the end of this episode. Thank you very much. We'll be back next week and for several more weeks this Halloween season with more Basement of Horror. Until next time, the one who dies with the most toys is dead.